Off the top of the hour, we have another special guest to welcome into the fold here, Christina Bossinakis, senior editor of the TDN, joining us via Skype to help out in terms of the Keeneland sale. And Christina, this is a lot to keep track of. We're up to what, day 10, and Friday is closing day?
You have no idea. Even if you're there for the first 5 days or 4 days, it is a marathon sale. And, you know, they sell a lot of horses in a very, pretty relatively short period of time. It's hard on the buyers. It's hard on the consigners. It's hard on the reporters, too, by the way. But they get it done. They do a good job.
Tell us overall, there are some big stories with regard to this sale. APND and Dynaformer, these are the last progeny of those two stallions that we'll see through the ring. Are we seeing more money for these horses in particular?
I don't know that if we saw necessarily more than we have in the past for him. In fact, we spoke to Jeffrey Russell at Keeneland, and he felt that he was a little bit surprised that they didn't bring more than they did. However, if he was himself a $2.9 million horse at Keeneland, so he's got a history there. The highest price for one of his offspring this year was a $1.1 million yearling out of Moonlight Sonata, who's a graded stakes winner. And so he's had, and if you recall, 2 years ago, Mr. Bessilou brought $4.2 million. He was by APND, so he has a really good record. But I don't necessarily think he brought a lot more than he would have in the past.
Well, we were just looking at the sales toppers to this point, and the top one was a Distorted Humor out of the Mir Mushka at 1.6, was it? 1.6 million?
1.65 million. And actually, it was interesting having Mr. Zayat on a little bit earlier, because Mr. Zayat campaigned Mushka, and then Betty Moran's Brushwood ended up buying her at auction. So she was, that was the sale topper. Shadwell bought that horse, and that was the highlight of the first day. Eaton Sales sold that horse, and it just goes to show how Distorted Humor, how well he's doing, and you can always count on him to be atop the.
We already mentioned the APND Moonlight Sonata went for $1.1 million. I think we have some video that we want to show you with regard to that sale. If we can pull that up, here we go. Hip 128. Christina, it still sort of strikes me every time I go to a sale, as kind of technologically advanced as we are, and how everything, the sales catalog is on the iPad. Still, we sell these horses as they stand in the ring, and people just yell from any angle that they can if they want to make a bid.
It gets a little bit exciting. It's changed a little bit over the last couple of years, because they have these private rooms, these ensuite rooms where you don't necessarily have the buyers always all in the pavilion, which, in my opinion, it takes away a little bit of the fun and the spark and the pizzazz, when you actually have people bidding against each other and they're all face to face. But yeah, it can get a little bit, people can get a little bit excited, jumping over seats. We had somebody, we had somebody that was trying to take a picture of one of the $1 million dollar-horses earlier in the session, and that was kind of exciting, because they get excited. Sometimes they're small-time breeders, or and it's significant for them to bring $1 million in the ring.
Yeah, it can change people's lives. You mentioned a couple of the connections, just touched on Mr. Bessilou and Darley, notably absent from the earlier portions of the sale. Mr. Bessilou, just in general, hasn't bought anything yet, correct?
Yeah, Ben Leon spent a lot of money over the last 2 years. I don't have an exact figure. He spent a significant amount of money. In fact, he was the second leading buyer at Keeneland last year, and he didn't buy anything this year. So that has to be significant, Keeneland has to take a little bit of a hit there. Darley, they didn't buy any. I think they bought two through book 1 and 2. And then they ended up buying a Saturday session. They bought a couple more, but I don't even think they broke the $1 million mark with their purchases. And they were the leading buyer last year. So again, this can't be great news for Keeneland, but at the same time, the sale was, pretty steady, considering, that they had the absence of these two, these big buyers.
What about, we had a horse out here in Southern California that's really made a name for himself, My Best Brother, for Bill Curran, who bred this horse. He sold a half-brother to My Best Brother at the sale, and really, I think it surprised them. They expected maybe $900,000, $1 million. They got 1.5 for this horse.
Yeah, they got, I think, 1.55 million for that son of, it was a Bernardini colt. And yeah, the recent, obviously, there's also, the mare has already produced a grade 1 winner in Stormello, which is a full lost a full brother to my best brother, so that couldn't have hurt. But the recent update, you have to think, always helps. But Coolmore was the one who stepped in to buy this this colt, and they were still spending money this year happily. So yeah, that colt, the Bernardini, went to Coolmore.
How about hip 45 here, Christina? We spoke to Mr. Zayat a little while ago, a half-sister to Bodemeister, filly by Smart Strike out of the mare Untouched Talent. Well,
this filly, it's a little bit interesting in that it ended up being John Secura and Bruce Lunsford that ended up buying this mare. Donato Lani was doing the bidding, and it's significant because they lost a very significant mare a few months ago, I think back in June, Madcap Escapade. And so they lost that mare, and I'm guessing to some degree looking to replace or to bring back that caliber of filly into their broodmare band. And they bought this filly. But again, Bodemeister had such a spectacular, even though he didn't win the Derby and he didn't win the Preakness, he couldn't have been more impressive in defeat in those races. And it's unfortunate we didn't see him go on through the rest of the season. But I think they're very high on this filly. So I think that they might have a good ability to come back.
Yeah, we understand she'll be Bob Baffert will be training this filly. Of course, Bob who trained Bodemeister for Mr. Zayat.
Yeah, and it's funny because having Bob Baffert there was great. He wasn't there for the Fasig Saratoga sale last month, and as we all know, he had his issues earlier this year with the heart attack, and I don't think that he had been traveling, but he looked great. He's lost probably over 20 pounds. He seemed to be spry. He was on his form, and he was buying horses, and he was still up to his old self. He signed the ticket on an unusual heat later on in the sale, and he signed it as Mr. Ed Savant. Bob Baffert, he's back up to his old ways. So it was good to see him, and he'll be training that too, by the way.
Speaking of Baffert, what about this Juddmonte purchase? Hip 52, a colt by Elusive Quality out of Extra Heat. We don't see Juddmonte buying at American auctions very often, if at all.
And and it's for obvious reasons. They have such an extensive breeding operation that they don't really have to. But I think after now they have about, I think just about over 20 horses with Bill Mott, who's, largely based on the East Coast. But they were looking to get back onto the West Coast. As we all know, Bobby Frankel used to train for Juddmonte before he passed away a couple of years ago. So they're looking to get back onto the West Coast, and they bought a few horses here, primarily to race in the United States. And yeah, they will be going to Bob Baffert, which is a little bit of a little bit of news that came out of that, because they haven't had horses with him in the past.
It'll be good to see the Juddmonte Silks back out here on the West Coast. We certainly welcome any of their runners, whether they're purchased at auction or homebreds for them. A couple more that we want to touch on. Hip 307, sold on day 2, a colt by Arch out of Siddle, purchased on behalf of Alto Racing, who campaigned Arch Warrior.
Arch Warrior was pretty impressive, and I think he came into that race in New York with a lot of hype behind him. So you almost thought to yourself that he may have to win by 20 for people to, for it to be justified. But, it was impressive. He did it the right way. I think that this horse definitely stands to improve as the distance gets longer. And it's really nice to see when owners, especially owners that maybe have been in the last few years, they've dabbled, they've had a few horses, they've had a couple of nice horses, and then they come back to the sales, they buy horses. That's what you really want to see. You want to see these people coming back and putting money back into the industry. So they're hoping that Arch colt is going to, hopefully be, at least on even par with the Arch Warrior. And, we'll have to see. But they bought a few horses through Todd Pletcher this time around.
What about the last one we want to touch on, Hip 956 on day 4, a colt by Empire Maker out of Lou Ravi. This one purchased by Big Red Farm. And I think just over the last couple of years, you're seeing a lot more from the Japanese buyers at the sales, and obviously taking some of these horses back to Japan for stud duty, as we saw with I'll Have Another and Empire Maker himself.
Yeah, and you also have to note too that with these horses too, the Japanese yen at this time it was pretty strong. So I think that Keeneland expected them to be there in force. They were there in force. they bought, again, buying this type of horse at at this type of level is not it's not a mystery to us. We've seen this before with the Japanese. And again, actually, the horse the gentleman who bred the horse is actually Japanese as well, but has a few mares in the United States. So it's nice to see that they're performing at the highest level, and also with the success of I'll Have Another. They obviously they believe in our program, and they want to come back and buy some mare or some horses here in the United States. So it was a nice little connection to have them buying at that top level this time.
Well, you're right in the middle of the marathon.
Yeah.
Stay strong. Couple more days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I came back. I covered the initial session, the opening session, the book 1 and 2. It's interesting too that how strong that book 2 was, because some people were commenting how book 1 might have been a little bit light. The RNAs were up, and although they still had the fireworks, like as we said, that the Mushka, sword humor that sold at 1.65 that first day. But it was interesting how much, how many fireworks were, on date, for book 2. So it's good to see. Maybe they'll play with their format going down the road, but the sale held up pretty well and pretty strong. So it's good to see for, some of the breeders, the smaller breeders, and, trying to break even or to make some money.
Perfect. All right, Christina, thanks very much, and enjoy getting back to your normal routine there in New Jersey. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you. Good seeing you guys.
Christina Bossinakis, senior editor at TDN. It's so much to keep track of.
Yeah, it really is. It sounds like my good friend Bob Baffert